when I look back, I kind of think that, you know, I've been, even though it was a you know, a terrible experience, and there have been, you know, a number of very seriously challenging circumstances that that I've had to deal with. But the one part actually why I'm here today, which is really great, is that even though the accident happened and it was first week on the job, 20 years old, here's a power saw, good luck, go for it, and that's how you fall trees. What in the end saved me really was the fact that I worked for a very large company. And this is something that when we look at this from a public policy perspective, I'll get to in a few minutes. I was amazingly lucky that this particular company had a number of helicopters available, which got me actually from the bush off the west coast of Vancouver Island to Vancouver. If it hadn't been for that level of support, I wouldn't have physically survived. So when I kind of look at, you know, what are some of the pivotal milestones that are all part of this process, and you've heard a number of those milestones mentioned already. And then, and Ken and I have had a number of conversations around that when I say that I consider myself amazingly fortunate that I've been able to carry on. And I was able to and have been able to carry on because of the support of our local camp chair, the IWA camp chair. This was a logging division, for those of you that were not aware of this, with 450 employees off the west coast of Vancouver Island, working for, as Andy mentioned, a company by the name of McMillan-Bodell, which through the cooperation between the union and the push by the part of the union, the employer accepted responsibility for the accident because we didn't have any training. It was simply just that. Here's a power saw, good luck, go for it. And it was a 50-foot alder that barber chaired on me. I had no idea what actually barber chairing means. What it means is that tree split up the middle and then came down on me. So those were, you know, those are some of the serious circumstances, but also at the same time why I'm still here. So on one hand, it happened because there was no training. Coming out of it is that, of course, the training regime for individuals that became new fallers changed dramatically after that. So being able to get back to work until the time that Andy mentioned in 1982 when McMillan-Bodell terminated all disabled workers, really what got me started onto this path. And when I say I'm fortunate, it's really because I'm not, I didn't get pushed to the margins of society. And that's really what happens to so many individuals, and you've heard this, you've heard the statistics in the federal civil service, and all too often we see this happening. And when I you know, look at the fact that there were so many champions that I consider friends and colleagues, and many of you are here today, for which I'm, you know, tremendously grateful. Then when I consider where we are today in terms of our statistics, the fact that we have 1.1 million people with disabilities living on social assistance in this country, when you think that their income level is less than $1,000 a month on average, is something that we don't ever think about until you get into that situation yourself. It's not part of your mindset. When I look at an old friend of mine, his name was Bill Chambers, and he got hurt also from McMillan-Bodell in a different logging operation, and same type of injury, but he wasn't prepared to cope with unemployment, chronic pain, and depression. And on March 31st, 1988, he basically hooked up a hose to the exhaust on his van, lifted himself in, close the door and turn the key. And when we look at the fact that 40 times the national average is the suicide rate for individuals with disabilities that are unemployed, those are the challenges that we face today. And that's why I consider myself lucky that for the last 40 years, this happened in 1977, that I've been able to carry on. But where were we in 1977? We didn't have human rights legislation. We didn't have a duty to accommodate. We didn't have a return to work obligation. We didn't have a code. We didn't have a UN convention. We didn't have best practice guidelines. We didn't have collective agreements. So in that sense, as Cam said, we've come a long ways. But we have a hell of a lot further to go. I mean, over the last 10 years, we've not made progress in the hiring of people with disabilities. It just doesn't happen. I mean, we have been fortunate through the through NIDMAR and now through the universities that we have been, I guess, quite often, a lot of folks would agree with that, probably that some of us have been a bit of a royal pain to try to advance the agenda. We have the standards, as have been mentioned before, our university, our audit tool, and so on. And in terms of this entire development process, you know, I would be totally amiss if I didn't mention, you know, the tremendous contribution over the last 20 years of my colleague Joyce Gravel, who's had often and more often than not the unenviable task of having to deal with me. So that's been probably a past and continuing challenge for her. But where are we today? And I just want to spend a bit of time on throwing some of the challenges out to you, because all of you are in institutional positions to influence change, to change the terrible narrative that we are still facing. Recently, and I'll give you an illustration. Recently, we had a new company come on board as a sponsor. This organization is a $5 billion business that employs almost 10,000 employees. And their senior director for external affairs came to see us the other day to kind of look at how we can closer collaborate, how we can work with them on how they can produce a better return to work program within their organization. One of the questions she posed to me was, she said, we have a senior vice president who is one of the most powerful individuals in this organization. It's a huge lumber company, second largest in Canada. He was, a couple of months ago, diagnosed with a severe neurological irreversible impairment. This impairment is going to allow him to fully function mentally with no problem. But in less than a year, he will no longer be able to walk. He will have to rely on a wheelchair. And he's made it perfectly clear to the CEO and everybody else that there is no way that he's prepared to go to work in a wheelchair. What does that tell us as a society? And this is, you know, it's a straightforward, real case because, you know, I tried to, some of us, you know, tried to provide some potential options for her on how do you deal with this? How do you deal with the stigma that you still have, even though the company, the CEO, has made it very clear, we will do whatever we need to accommodate you and your situation. Headquarters of this company, like I said, it's a you know, it's a $5 billion business, is totally accessible. That's not a question. I've been there. But how do we deal with a stigma that's still out there because we don't reintegrate individuals with disabilities? It's not part of our culture. So the first part, in terms of the opportunities is, how do we change that? And it's something I have the opportunity at the moment to be involved a bit in the creation of a National Disability Act, is that we need to address this cultural piece. We talk about, and the minister talks about, Carla Qualtrough talks about hiring people with disabilities. But if as an employer, if as a workplace, you do not have a return to work program in the first place there, how do you expect to change the culture if it's not important enough for that particular workplace to bring their own employees who acquire an impairment back to work? That's, in my view, a key challenge. The other part is that Cam and his organization have done a tremendous amount of work in contributing research and providing solutions. The challenge that all of you as leaders have is, how do we convert that research into concrete action that it will lead to results, rather than having it sit on the shelf? So we need leadership, and all of you are in a position to provide that leadership and drive this forward. We have seen some very concrete and tangible results. Jochen mentioned those, Wayne talked about them, Andy talked about them, but we've got a long ways to go. One of the concrete pieces that I am, on a personal level, am extremely proud of is the difference that our efforts have been able to make in the lives of individuals who, rather than getting pushed to the margins of society, when 50% of people with disabilities live below the poverty line, and that's consistent almost around the world, where they are able to carry on, so that we now have, as a result of the adoption of our audit tool, the entire healthcare sector in British Columbia, covering 150,000 workers, now has a dedicated return to work program that's enshrined in collective agreement language. It's very clear, it requires both sides, it's a great new model, makes a huge difference, rather than where I, as an individual, was amazingly fortunate because there was nothing 40 years ago in this regard. Now, nobody in our healthcare sector across the entire province will fall through the cracks anymore. The other clear, I think, opportunities that we have collectively and the challenges going forward is really working through the collaboration between unions and employers, moving and enshrining return to work. We need to also encourage introducing and making sure that this is in the, on an institutional basis. We see an example in Ontario, return to work obligation under the Workers' Compensation Act. We see the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act. The German government has a federal disability management program and a very clear strategy. So there are pockets of success. How do we broaden this out across the board so that we can change, and we will change, the terrible statistic that we are still dealing with in this area? I also think going forward, there are some huge research opportunities to contribute towards providing practical solutions that we really don't have yet. We do a great job in raising issues, raising concerns, raising awareness, for example, on the mental health side, but the folks that come to us where we try to support them, they want concrete solutions. You deal with a mental health challenge at CP Rail running a 6,000 horsepower locomotive, very different than you would deal with somebody who's got the same challenge in a white-collar environment. But we do not have concrete answers so that those that are on the front line, that are committed towards helping their friends on how to change this. So that's another huge opportunity. Or this vice president, for a very major corporation who has acquired an impairment that is irreversible, but does not want to be seen to be disabled by being in a wheelchair. And even though that is sort of one of the easiest. So we've got a long ways to go in terms of changing our culture, producing concrete results that will make a measurable difference on the front line in terms of achieving better outcomes. I'm privileged, I'm honored to be here today, and thank you, Cam, to you and your organization for making this happen.